Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadet First Class Dustin Jones Phillips. It's my privilege to welcome you to the 27th Annual National Character and Leadership Symposium. NCLS would not be possible without the support of the United States Air Force Academy Class of 1959, our flagship supporter, the Class of 1973, the Class of 1974, the Class of 1993, the Association of Graduates, the Air Force Academy Foundation, the Falcon Foundation, the John and Lynn Muse Educational Foundation, Earl Enix, Class of 1977, and Mrs. Candy Enix, and many other kind supporters. Thank you for your contributions. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Major General Michael Fantini and Dr. Ann Rizzo. General Fantini is the Director of Air and Space Forces Warfighting Integration Capability. In this position, he leads advanced efforts for design integration and capability development across the total force for multi-domain concepts. His team identifies prioritized ways and means to guide resourcing priorities, improving Air Force lethality, and enhancing the joint coalition fight. General Fantini graduated from Catholic University of America and was commissioned through the ROTC program at Howard University. He has served in a variety of operational assignments as an F-16 pilot, instructor pilot, and weapons officer. He has commanded a fighter squadron, Expeditionary Operations Group Training Wing, and the Air Expeditionary Wing. Dr. Rizzo graduated from Georgetown University before attending the State University of New York at Buffalo School of Medicine. She completed her residency in general surgery at Tulane University, New Orleans, and her trauma and surgical critical care fellowship at the Washington Hospital Center in Washington, D.C. She is an Air Force Reserve individual mobilization augmentee attached to the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. She is deployed to Afghanistan, where she facilitated the initiation of the Afghan trauma system. She's a professor of surgery at Virginia Commonwealth University and the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, and she serves on the Medical School Admissions Committee. Moderating our session tonight is Cadet First Class Ben Smith from Cadet Squadron 11. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to present to you Major General Fantini, Dr. Rizzo, and CONC Smith.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for coming to speak to us. I know we're all really grateful that you're here to come share your experiences, whether it be in the military as joint spouses, with your family, and then the diverse school systems and communities that you've each worked in. And so if it's okay, I'd just like to start with the first question.
Absolutely. Please, go ahead.
Awesome. So could you please enlighten us how you both were able to build successful high-profile careers around your military service, your spouse, and your family commitments? And then what advice would you have for us that are about to embark on our own journeys, in our own careers, or those already in the midst of their careers?
Go ahead, honey.
Wow, that's an easy question.
I have to start with the easy ones.
So I guess our guiding principle in our time in the military was that we both needed to be doing something that we enjoyed and wanted to do. And as long as the other person was doing something that was enjoyable and that they wanted to do, we would accommodate each other's careers to help facilitate that. Now, to put in the family part, there were many times where I was gone and Mike was in charge, or Mike was gone and I was in charge. And you just have to have coordination. And on top of that, we've always had a nanny, because our hours are very unpredictable, our deployments are unpredictable, and I always wanted to make sure that the kids had somebody at home at all times. So we indeed always did have a nanny.
Yeah, and so I'd say it's communication, right? And I've always had this concept of folks that think they have a personal life and a professional life, and that these things are separate. That's a fallacy, right? These things are connected. And in my mind, this communication within the family, between Ann and I, to kind of realize our particular goals, and communication to our bosses, right? Our communication to our bosses, so they understood what our intent was, and to be just be open with that. And 99% of the time, leadership is really interested to try and help you accomplish your goals. And so if you're communicating that to your leadership, absolutely. And then we have, we have some other functional aspects of how we did it, which impacts, it'll impact how you want to run your household. We have friends of ours that have said, oh my God, I would never do that. And we said, great, that's fine. That's your choice. We're choosing to do things slightly differently. And we can get into more of that specificity if you want to talk about that in more questions.
Well, I actually have another point to add about that. So the whole concept that both of us have talked about of people and family, it's a big deal. Because as a military member, and you're in the middle of Nevada or the middle of Europe by yourself, my mother's not there, my father's not there, my cousins aren't there, my family is you. And so many times in the middle of the night when I got a telephone call that please come in, and Mike was gone, I would pick the kids up, take them to one of my friend's house, drop them off, and go on my way. And it was because they understood my position and what I needed to do and were willing to help as part of the family. And it's incumbent on you to build your family in the Air Force that way so that you can depend on each other and you know what each other's roles are and what they may need.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I'm sure with your careers you've had to make sacrifices for each other throughout different parts of your life. So I wanted to ask you how you made those sacrifices and how you decided which one's turn it was, or if there was a turn to be had.
So I would say I'm on the lucky side of the house in that I view that Ann had taken on more of that sacrificial side of the house than I have, and for any number of reasons. And I don't just, this is not blaming the Air Force, this is just the reality of what we chose to do functionally. And then from a personality perspective, I'm just not that good with kids. And so many times I would say I was probably more absent than I should have, and it wasn't. That's just a personality flaw on my side of the house.
So that's a really good point. And on many of the assignments that we took together, Mike would come home and say, is it okay if I go to the desert? And I would flip open the calendar and say, okay. Very rarely was there a reason to say no. Because there's flexibility in everything. And besides death and taxes, there's really nothing that's permanent all the time. And some of the assignments were harder than others, definitely. When we first went to Europe, I went without a job. And as I was doing laundry and lugging hot water, because there was no hot water in our house, it was one of those things that I stood back and said, what the heck am I doing? But you know what? You have to make the most of the opportunities. So when they started the Athena program and were rotating surgeons, I called General Carlton and I said, General Carlton, you don't need to rotate a surgeon. I'm already here. He said, yes, job's yours. You have to make the most of the opportunities. You have to talk to other people. And you have to inquire about what those opportunities are because they're different in every command and every situation.
I really appreciate that. I'm sure your audience does too. And then building off of that, how did those sacrifices you made for each other, those compromises you made, translate to your work experience, to your jobs? Because I'm also sure that you've found yourself making a sacrifice in your work for those around you.
So I don't know if I'd say sacrifices per se. I would say that we kind of came up with our plan, right? So I lived with a guy named Steve Clapp. I was married for 4 years. I lived with Clapper for 7, right? So
not something we're proud of.
I don't think it's such a bad deal, right? But what I'm trying to convey here is that we had a plan. So we got married, and I see Soup and Kim going, yeah, we know Clapper. But we got married. We dated for 7 years. And we were intentional on not getting married until we kind of were ready to take that on. We were intentional to not have children until we were ready to take that on, i.e. we were living together, right? Because we were commissioned. I went to pilot training and went to medical school, and about 4.5 years later, we kind of rejoined after 3 assignments. for myself while she was in training. So we were intentional in terms of how we planned our lives out. And that's just exemplar. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have kids. It just means you need to have a plan, right, if you're going to do it. And then once we were together, we had a plan where we chose to utilize the functional and tactical level aspects of our family where we needed to have a nanny. And many folks would not view that, go, oh my God, you have someone living in your house 24/7. And I'm like, yeah, why not? Because we were achieving different goals. So that's why I didn't see like sacrifices. We kind of had it planned
Right,
out.
exactly. It wasn't, as I talked about in the other talk, there are sacrifices. It's not like we went to the mall or watched a lot of movies. Our time was very dedicated to training, visiting each other, supporting each other's needs, and then when we had a family, supporting the kids and splitting up what the needs were for the children. And I think overall, if you read any of the literature about successful people, it's very interesting because one of the things that most of the literature in the sciences talks about is time to explore and time to do it yourself. And I think that's something that whether we did it intentionally or whether it was a byproduct of, I don't have time for this right now, you do it yourself, our children learned. I can do it myself. I can navigate the metro system in Rome by myself. I can stay home by myself while you're gone for 2 days. I can get myself to track practice and gymnastics practice. And it really instilled in them a self-reliance on, I know what my job is, and I can do it, just like everybody else in the family.
And I think the statute of limitations has expired on leaving our kids alone at some certain point in time.
So we can't be arrested.
We may have pushed the bounds there, but we trusted the kids.
Awesome. And then if you don't mind, could you expound on the time management? Because I'm sure that's a very important aspect in both part of your lives and how you divvy out the time to everything to have its fair share.
Well, yesterday was a perfect example. Mike called it speed dating. So we had like 30 minutes with the mech department, 30 minutes with the aero department, 30 minutes for capstone, 30 minutes. But that's really kind of how we live our lives. Whether at work or at home, we had a book on our counter for 20 years. And every week we would have a calendar meeting with the children, the nanny, whoever happened to be visiting or living in our house at that time. You just never knew. And you met on Sunday and we wrote everything down in the book. And if it wasn't in the book, it didn't exist, no matter how much it existed in your brain. It needed to be in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I probably that was probably a C+ for me there.
But that helped keep ourselves organized, so we knew what events we needed to go to, what events were most important, and how to do a hierarchy of the events.
Yeah. And so I'd say and to me that goes to this communication piece of understanding who's got to do what when. And then, so we do our little calendar meetings, then we have hot tub talks. And that's where we kind of try to look at the larger picture of where do you want to see your family in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? Although I don't think we've failed at kind of achieving any of that, but trying to kind of map out what the longer term would look like as well.
And flexibility is important because, as we've also talked about, there is a little bit of luck and there's a little bit of timing involved in some of these things. If I want that job and that job's not ready right now, but I can only take that job for 2 months, that's a bad timing issue. Whereas if I show up and they say, oh, well, we just happen to need a surgeon. Yes, I've meet the timing thing. So there is a little bit of luck and a little bit of timing that has to be in the discussion, and we have to be flexible. Do we have to flex one way, 1 week or 2 weeks, one way or another to meet that time commitment?
And let me just also offer, it's not always peaches and cream.
Absolutely not.
There's always the what? And generally it was kind of on my side. And it was probably because I was with General Miller, until 8 or 9 o'clock in the Pentagon trying to figure out some programming problem. But it's not all peaches and cream. So there's got to be some element of tolerance and some element of empathy on kind of what needs to be occurring at any particular time, and there needs to be kind of an ebb and flow before it.
And on that topic, I'm going to stray from the topic just a little bit. We talked a little bit about mindfulness and self-awareness and self-caring. And for me, it's always been Mike. I can come home and I can talk to him about anything. Now, sometimes he wants to go, oh, no, 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 please, no, 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 no.
As long as she doesn't show those pictures.
But it's vice versa. He can talk to me about anything, and that's part of our relationship. It's in the cone of silence. Get it off your chest. It's part of, okay, now I've got rid of that. I'm moving on to the next thing.
That's perfect.
Okay.
But then going off of the peaches and cream aspect, because I'm sure a lot of us wish we were perfect, but in the end we're not. How do you get past those failures? How do you pick yourself up and say, let's keep moving forward, let's take on tomorrow?
Roses and chocolate.
Foot rubs.
That's right. Yeah. And that's generally me on the delivering end. I don't get many roses and chocolates. So.
Me neither.
So I'm going to
This is my surprise face, Ben.
Sorry, sir.
So I am going to have to tell one story about that. So we're at Nellis Air Force Base, and someone has dislocated his shoulder, like for the 47th time. And so I call my friend, the orthopod, and I say, hey, can you take a look at this? He's dislocated his shoulder. He's like, yeah, no problem. We can fix that up. You know, a little incision, blah, blah, blah. He'll have his arm in a sling for a few days. So it's Sunday morning. He's got his arm in a sling. He's home. Sunday morning, we're going to church, right? I've got 3 children under the age of I don't know what. Is church penance for me or penance for them? I'm not sure. Just trying to get them dressed and out the door, and I'm hustling and I'm hurrying and I'm getting them out the door. And in comes this one with blood just dripping. I'm like, what were you doing? You've got an arm in a sling. He's like, well, I was just going to drill a hole in the concrete real quick, but it caught on my ring.
I had an extra 10 minutes. That's all we needed.
And so that's where my mantra to the children is, when you end up in the emergency room, it better be something that you can tell the emergency room doc and not admit that your mother's a trauma surgeon, or don't end up there.
Yeah.
Because that's where we ended up, in the emergency room, bleeding to death with 3 small children dressed to go to church. It happens.
I think I want to invoke the 10% truth rule.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
That is certainly a bunny trail. Ben, can you get us back on the topic, please?
Yes, sir, I for sure can. So going back to the topic and theme of NCLS, could you give us an example of meeting someone from a different culture or a different society, and how did you handle yourself in that, or yourselves in that situation?
You want that? I mean, you know, you be respectful. You know, so I had engagements with Afghan leadership. I had engagements with Afghan leadership that I knew were dirty. And so you kind of got to acknowledge the environment you're in. But, you know, step 1, be respectful and humble. Understand that you're not in, you know, on your proverbial home turf. And then just kind of see where the engagement goes from there. Because in general, folks view the U.S. military, and I'm not talking our citizenry in the nation here, I'm talking other countries view us very respectfully as well. And so we're going to start off there, and I would just kind of do exactly what I want someone to do to me, and I try and show that to them.
So that came up in my talk earlier about my travels through multiple countries. And as you can see, I'm not really a quiet person. It's hard for me to just sit and watch. But you do. You have to sit, and you have to watch, and you have to listen. Is it time to drink the tea? Is it time to move on? Is it time to, visit the houses? Take the lead and watch and listen to see what other people are doing. We also had the experience of having several international nannies. And so you're welcoming somebody into your house that may have a completely different belief system, ethics system than you do. And that's something that we learn to accommodate and even learn from. because there's always something to be learned. And so, again, as hard as it may be for us Americans who are very jovial and like to talk and are outgoing, sometimes you just have to sit and watch and listen.
Thank you so much. And then both being leaders in your fields, I'm sure you both had teams that were diverse in the team itself. How did you bring the team together? How did you manage maybe conflicts inside of your team?
I start off, one, by providing what I believe to be or hope to be is pretty clear guidance on what your expectations are as from a leadership perspective. And what I nominally tell my folks is I go, look, I expect us to have a professional environment, I expect us to be aggressive, and I expect us to have mature conversations. And so when you throw aggressive and mature in there, people start going, oh my God, what does he mean? You know? And I mean exactly what I say, have a mature conversation. You know, one of the mature conversations that I will tell you about is, as a fighter squadron commander, I had no minorities and one woman. That is not diverse. We're on the road to get better, and we will continue to battle towards that. But, you know, we need to say that up front and have the conversation. So I kind of think of it as squaring up and then just let's have that conversation. Let's throw down. And then you got to just realize that, you know, you need to do it from a respectful position, and if you just start slinging mud at each other, it's just going to go kind of downhill from there. So how do you have this respectful, aggressive, mature environment? Because that's what I want my team to take out into the battle of the Pentagon, as an example. Because I need them to be aggressive with whether it's other elements of the staff, whether it's other services, whether it's other coalition members, et cetera, et cetera.
So I can pile on that with, you have to lead by example. If you're not a tolerant person, if you are showing deference, those are things that can affect the people that you work with. And I talked about this yesterday, and I'm going to talk about it again. I was the only female resident out of 70 residents for 5 years. Today, I have 6 out of 6 female residents. Well, in my department, I have 7 out of 12 female trauma surgeons. I didn't do that on purpose. It's just when they came and visited, they went, oh, this is where we want to be. Now the residents say that, and they say, oh, this is where we want to be. So you have to lead by example. You have to allow diversity and say, hey, I can do this, please come join me.
Awesome, thank you so much. And do you ever have to lead in an unfamiliar culture setting, especially for you, Dr. Rizzo, as you were on your mission trips and abroad with surgery? How are you able to bring that team together and to accomplish the mission?
Right. So most of the mission trips that I took, the teams, we assembled them in advance. And they were assembled on merit. I assembled them because I needed an anesthesiologist. I needed a respiratory therapist. We needed a nurse anesthetist. These are the people that we needed. And so it's a meritocracy. I didn't say, well, I need to have 2 of these kind of folks and I need 3 women. I said, we're going to Haiti and this is what we need. This would be great if we have extra added qualifications, but this is what we need. So the last trip that I went, I actually took a dietitian who was Haitian, which was wonderful. She could speak the language. It added diversity to our team, and it really brought up the level of attendance at each of our lectures by the Haitian community.
Thank you. Sir, do you have anything to add?
No.
Perfect. And then going on, a big part of NCLS this year is biases. And I wanted to ask either of you two if, in any of your interactions with other people, cultures, or societies, if you had a bias that you uncovered or a bias that you found out you had, or if someone had a bias towards either one of you, and then how did you react from that? How did you turn it into a learning experience?
So here's, I got to, is this being live streamed?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so my team in the Pentagon right now at a place called the Merge, and they're probably having some brown water. But the bias thing is just a fact of life, right? There's just, I apologize, I'm Caucasian, right? We grew up the way I grew up. But what I do is try and present myself from a balanced perspective, but again, that's from my perspective. So as I was at the Merge, I think it was 3 weeks ago, and two fantastic colleagues of mine who are female, we got into a discussion, and they're like, you need to understand what it's like for me in that environment. Because you walk in with 2 stars and X, Y, Z, and I go, and it grounded me to you know, that was great feedback, because I go, you're absolutely right. Because, you know, one of our biases, I think, who's psychology? Anyone? Anyone? Help me out here. You know, I just naturally think that since I'm doing things nominally okay, that generally I template myself on others, when the reality is I got to really work hard to kind of go, you're right. You're not a 2-star walking into this environment, or not able to just kind of say, this is what we're going to do. But I expect that, so I need to really rein myself in and realize I need to help those folks with how do I empower them to at least translate the authority that I want to empower them with, so that they have the horsepower in these various engagements. And so it was great feedback that 2 very capable ladies that I get to work with provided me over some brown water.
So I'm going to take the other side of that coin. So I get on an airplane and I'm typing away, doing my medical records, and the gentleman next to me says, oh, are you a physician? And I said, yes. And he said, well, you know, I'm an internist, pretty high-ranking, coming to DC for a big meeting with some high-ranking medical people, and he's telling me all this, and I'm typing away. And he says, so, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a trauma surgeon. He's like, no way. You don't look like a trauma surgeon. What do you do with that? Do I need to be bigger? Do I need to have a beard? Does my hair need to be down?
No.
How am I going to look like a trauma surgeon? But I mean, this is another medical professional, pretty high up in the hierarchy of medicine, watching me type at my computer doing these medical records, and that's the reaction. So if that's his reaction, what's the reaction of when I walk in the room and the patient says, well, when's the doctor coming? Okay, well, I am the doctor, surprise. So it's one of those things that you kind of just have to have a thick skin, and we talked about this a little bit in one of the diversity lectures, that it just doesn't really bother me anymore. I almost want to laugh now when people say that to me. Oh, you're a trauma surgeon? And I just want to laugh at them. But it's one of those things that you just have to have some thick skin, not take offense at other people's ignorance, and move forward. And that goes being on the other side of the diversity equation.
Yeah, well, that's why I consider this squaring up against the problem and just taking it on. In one of our first panel that we did, one of the questions was about a person from Queens, a cadet from Queens, New York, and the feeling in that area of the city was that the only reason people go in the military because they couldn't do anything else. And how would you handle that? And I go, square up against it, man. Wear your uniform and salute in front of that son of a gun, or whoever that was. But I kind of view life like that, frankly.
Awesome, thank you so much. And then, sir, going back to your story, I wanted to ask you how we can have humility as people to take the advice that others give us, no matter where we are in life, because I know people in general don't always like to admit they're wrong or to admit that they made a mistake. So how can we rise above that?
Well, I think, being humble, being empathetic towards that person that's providing that input. And I always kind of think of it as, I always want to hear various positions and differences and what have you, and I take what I think is valuable and I'll put it in the proverbial toolbox, and then what's maybe not so valuable, you just thank the folks and move on.
So that is a really good question, because one of the hardest things you're going to do as a leader is give feedback. My chief residents, they're fifth-year residents, they can operate their way inside and outside of anywhere, and they'll come to me and say, the hardest thing to do is deal with these other residents. Well, that's part of the leadership experience. So first of all, you have to have the emotional intelligence to figure out how the other person is going to take your feedback. If they're immediately going to become defensive, they're not going to hear anything you say. So maybe you shouldn't take it head on, maybe you should take it a little bit around, or maybe you should take them to coffee. So you need to have the emotional intelligence to figure out how the feedback is going to be received to make sure that the number one message gets across well, that you don't engender animosity in giving the feedback. You want the feedback to be helpful, to be landing on an open, fertile playing field, and you want it to be timely. It doesn't help me to say, well, you know that operation that you did last week? Well, you've done 25 operations between now and last week. You don't know which one I'm talking about. I need to pull you aside after that case and say, hey, next time, let's think about doing this. It would have been a little bit quicker. We maybe could have used less instruments, etc. So know your audience and know how to effectively get the feedback into them to help them the next time.
Thank you so much. And then that leads into my next question, where I wanted to ask if you've ever had a team member or someone that is over or under you that is difficult to work with, and how did you work with them, if you were able to?
Difficult to work with?
Yes, sir, or yeah, difficult to work with.
Yes, and you said over or under?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, if you, with over, well, yeah, gosh, I don't know, I guess
Well,
I used to work for a guy named Millie, and he now happens to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And so, you know, you gotta, there's various personality traits, and to General Millie's core, he wants to do the right thing. He's a very intelligent, Princeton educated person, but has a bit of a gruff exterior. So there's times where you got to kind of fight through those things and continue to kind of work the problem, to present the information. And you have a duty to present the information the way the boss needs it, because that's how that person, male or female, needs to take it. So you got to kind of weather a bit of a storm. Once you kind of get through the storm and you break through these exteriors, you're going to be on the proverbial team forever. So it's tough to navigate that, and some of it just has to go with perseverance. You're going to have to take some abuse, maybe licks, if you will. Have a thick skin, and then you're going to be able to break through. So that's kind of up.
Mm-hmm. And the easiest way to do it is avoidance, and that is what you're not supposed to do. Because if you avoid the situation, you will never change it, and you will never make it better. And sometimes you just have to take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm going in, and steel yourself. But if you don't do that, whatever the difficulty is with the supervisor or the person being supervised is never going to go away if you don't hit it head on and sit them down and talk about it.
So the other technique I use with a subordinate is I task their butt. Task them. And make that person produce. And again, that is not avoiding it, but you have to set very clear guidance on what your expectations are. And if they meet those expectations, then great, right? If you thought that you're doing this from a learning perspective and you realize they're probably not going to meet those expectations, then you owe that person feedback quickly. You're doing two things there. You're either educating and developing, or you're teeing up for transition, because the person's really not able to support the mission. And that's what Secretary Gates talked about last night. He was a little bit more direct, right? Finding a way to have this person spend more time with their family was kind of a neat euphemism. But you owe that, right? You owe that to execution of the mission. Because otherwise, folks in your organization are going to look at someone sloughing off or not performing and what have you. And too many times, folks choose not to address these things. And that's why it's hard, right? It's hard because that's why people choose not to try and do it.
And a follow-up on that is documentation. Because in the civilian sector, and even in the military sector, to be able to move someone along or basically fire them from what they're doing, you have to have real good grounds, not just be Secretary Gates and say, okay, you're moving on. And so you need to document that you have tried to remediate them, that you have tried to bring them on board, and that these have been their offenses even with that effort. Because if you don't do that in our wonderful litigious society, that's what's gonna get, you're gonna get stuck with a lawsuit. So it's the right thing to do though. You don't just pass that person along that's not doing their job. Because now you're not helping me, who's on the receiving end of that person, and will now spend the next year of my life trying to get them out of the Air Force. Educate, remediate, and document.
Thank you so much. And then going on with all of these experiences that you've shared with us, all of these amazing thoughts, could you please tell us throughout your lives how you have learned who you are as individuals and how you have learned what your strengths and weaknesses are and have been able to play to those strengths and weaknesses?
So the longer you stay in, you get to take these personality tests and what have you. And I never remember whether I'm ASPQ or whatever they are. But
You're gold.
I'm like flaming orange, apparently. Because we did this with our organization, AFWIC, we did it about 3 months ago. And it was so funny, man. I'm like up here flaming orange. And so what I've learned about my personality is I'm always kind of looking forward. I don't really remember a whole lot of things behind us. And the neat thing is you need to understand that folks are not, you know, one of my problems is just thinking everybody's like myself, right? Flaming orange. We all want to just kind of move on. Let's accomplish stuff. Let's move. When the reality is there's many different personality types. And so I view that as moving the chess pieces on the board to win the game. My deputy Q Highnote, Brigadier General Q Highnote, views it as identifying someone's superpower. Like, what are you really good at? Let's find what you're really good at, and then let's parlay that in the organization and try and align you to that purpose. And it's not always, like I said, it's not always peaches and cream, and it's not always 100%, but that's the intent. I've also learned that I hate administrative stuff that and Brad, wherever my exec is, Brad, he knows this, getting me to kind of pay attention to the administrative actions that you have to do from a command and a director in a leadership position. It's just, I have to spend a lot of energy to do that, and luckily my staff carves out a lot of time for me to be able to take that and knock that out. But acknowledging that you know that, and telling your staff that allows them to help accommodate and position the organization for success.
So what he didn't tell you is we had a command-directed session where we all had to go and take those personality tests. Me as the command spouse, we took his command chief, you saw his picture up there, EJ, great guy. So the three of us are there taking the test. And I'm a very data-driven person, but when we ended up taking the test, the three of us were up here, and the rest of the class was over here. And the poor instructor got up and said, I really don't know what to do with you because I can't separate the three of you. But all three of us, came out with those same driven traits. We're going to look at the data, we're going to accomplish the mission, we're going to move on to the next mission, and we're going to help the people as best as we can.
I don't bother with the data because it's administrative. and I just move.
Exactly.
And that's why my exec is going, sir, the data's right here.
We all have our strengths, right?
Yes, we do.
Then before we open up to the audience for questions, I wanted to backtrack a little bit and ask if you had any advice to anyone that is about to embark on a joint spouse endeavor in the military, and anything you would advise them as they go on with this.
So I'm going to say be realistic, okay? You can't pick two widely diverse career fields and expect that the Air Force is going to accommodate those. Okay, so like my oldest daughter that you met, she's an intel officer and her fiance is a pilot. That's a very accommodating pairing. Being a physician, I can pretty much go anywhere that he goes. But you have to be very realistic. The Air Force does try to accommodate. It's always good to pick up the telephone and make some telephone calls, too, to the people that you know in those positions. But you can't expect them to bend over backwards when one of you, is a missileer and the other one is an FDA officer or whatever you want to call it. You have to be realistic in your options and try to pick options that are compatible, and then pick out those places that you can go together.
Yeah, so I'd say, to me, it dials back to communication and priorities. If you pick divergent priorities, then that's going to create stress and a challenge in that relationship. So you got to figure out how you might accommodate that. But you can't over-communicate. Not only between the couple, but also making sure your leadership is supportive of what you're trying to accomplish. And then also, you know, it's kind of a peculiar, the Air Force doesn't specifically owe you anything, right? The Air Force doesn't owe you a joint spouse assignment that you're content with. The Air Force owes you a good swing at the bat, but you need to be helpful along the lines of what Ann has kind of indicated of figuring out what you think would be a better aligned thing if indeed you as a couple want to move down that road. So, I would just, you know, Ann and I made very specific decisions of this pilot doctor, and then we lived apart for a number of years, and then, you know, we had to hire a nanny, and then we lived apart for other times. It was just the flexibility that we were able to kind of absorb in the relationship.
Thank you so much. And then I'd like to open up to the audience if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask.
Hello.
Sure.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My name is CC Skylerman from the Prep School B Squad, and this is a question for the doctor. You had briefly mentioned that you went to Haiti. I was wondering if you could kind of expand and tell us about that experience.
So I actually did a whole talk on this because I've been to several different countries on medical missions. And you, as a military member, can volunteer on the Comfort or the Mercy to go on medical relief missions. But there's also many other organizations, religious organizations, the American College of Surgeons, and you don't have to be a medical person. We take people that can stock disaster shelters, people that can paint, people that can teach, people that can play with the kids. So there's many, many opportunities out there, and you just need to start asking questions and saying, hey, can I go?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Jung from CS37. My question is, when you're going through a difficult time with your partner, how do you distinguish which advice is useful and which advice is not when both of your partner and yourself are vulnerable to other people's opinions?
Yeah. Wow. I guess I think it comes back to this communication thing and trust, right? If you're communicating, do you trust what your partner's saying? And has your partner's actions reinforced that trust? If along that journey you start seeing negative, no answers to that, you know, then that's when folks begin to turn to outside influences and what have you. And that's where I get, you know, communicate, build the trust, and then kind of go from there. If you have that, then it doesn't matter what the outside world is saying. It could be your parents, you know, it could be, you know, another suitor, potentially on whatever side, per se. And if you got the communication and trust, then that's going to be a bit of an armor against what these other elements are kind of injecting into the situation.
I totally 100% agree. I would never take outside advice before I talk to Mike about it. And when I watch these shows like Grey's Anatomy and these shows, I don't know how these people have time to have outside influences, because we barely have time to sit down and eat dinner. And that's how our schedules are scheduled. And that's what I would say to that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Jackson. I am a military spouse for 9 years already, and going on to hopefully 30. But 7 out of the 9 years, I've had to try to get my husband to seek help for PTSD and survivor's guilt. In the Intel community, there is a negative impact to going to seek help of, I'm going to lose my clearance, I'm not going to be able to fly or anything. How would you tell a spouse in that situation?
So as a spouse and as a military member, I have encountered that situation. And somebody asked a question at one of the earlier sessions about mental health in the United States. It is something that we're very bad at because we can't see it. And it's a chronic disease. It's like diabetes. It doesn't go away. I don't give you a magic pill. I don't do an operation, and it doesn't go away. And as a society, we're starting to learn the ramifications of ignoring this. And so as a spouse, you need to advocate for your spouse. And the military is now starting to recognize that we want you to stand up and say, hey, I'm having a problem, so that we can get you treatment and help. And on the backside, we are going to decrease the ramifications for your clearance, your flying ability, your intelligence. Now that's been slow in coming, and maybe only starting to see the effects of that in the last 5 or 6 years. But we had to start with recognize the problem, address the problem, and then move on.
I think, and you may, my sense is you've kind of gone down a couple of these trails already, right?
As a key spouse, yes.
Right, but to me, this is commander's business, right? Like, who's the senior NCO? Who's that next level of command that needs to be aware of this? But that becomes a rocky position from how your spouse may or may not take that. But I'd offer
And I'm not saying, I'm just using my spouse as an example, but
Okay.
in the Intel community that I've grown up in and been in because of my spouse,
Yeah.
that is the biggest fear of, if I go and say, hey, I
Yeah.
got a problem, they're going to keep me from flying. They're going to take away my security clearance. They're going to tell me I can't do my job that I love to do.
Yeah. So I think we're moving away from that and realizing that the brain is a pretty large organ in the body, and it's biological, and it needs to be maintained, and it needs treatment. And I think we need to get in the 21st century along those lines. I do believe we're moving towards that neck of the woods, but I'd have to reference you to someone that has a little bit more expertise in that area.
But as a commander, he's dealt with that issue, and that he welcomes people to come and say, look, I have an issue, and then we get them help. And so I think the command structure needs to start to have some transparency on that. Is yes, I have an open door policy, come in and talk to me about your issue. That's much better than the ramifications of not taking care of the issue and not treating the patient.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sure. Hi.
Hello, good afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Rizzo and General Fantini. Lieutenant Chavez, I have a sister currently that got picked up for a flight commissioning spot in the Delaware Guard. It's her dream job. She wants to be a flight nurse. And your conversation yesterday about the waiver process and the adversity that you face in trying to get your pilot slot in the Air Force. Well, I feel like she's at a point where she feels very discouraged because she is now going through the waiver process for iDrusen, which has a very low percentage of it being waived. I feel like everything I say to her is not helping her situation. She feels very discouraged. When you were going through that process, how did you lean on your loved ones for support?
I think, once again, I would just kind of update. First of all, it's kind of, my parents were totally not aware of any of this going on, right? My dad's like, what? Huh? He didn't really understand I was in the Air Force to stay until I had about 18 years in. I always wondered, when are you getting out? And then he's like, oh, you made 1-star. But to get to your specific question, it's kind of humorous. To get to your specific question, again, just kind of doing the best you can to support your loved ones in whatever situation they're in. And again, listening, squinting with your ears, and then trying to figure out if there's a way that you can provide more tangible support too.
So I think you're doing the right thing and you're supporting. You need to talk to people and find out about the waiver process and about this specific issue. But you also have to remember there's always another avenue. So maybe not with the Navy or not with the National Guard, but there are tons of flight programs with EMS, with certain hospitals now that are looking for specialized nurses. So maybe this one door is closing and you got to look for the other doors as well to still attain that goal if she really wants to be a flight nurse.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sure.
Good afternoon, General Fantini. Good afternoon, Dr. Rizzo, Cadet 4th Class Hour Halligan, Cadet Squadron 40. You talked a lot about time management and spending time with people you love and fitting that into a busy schedule. Can you talk some about, especially with the profession of arms, after a lot of mental and emotional taxing experiences that people may have, like stressful deployments, and how that can impact time that you spend and whether or not you are able to be there emotionally with people who you're close to?
And this will be the last question, please.
So there's a lot there. I have this sense of balance, and you have to figure out what your balance is. Like, I've worked half days for 34 years, half days plus, you know, and so people are like, what do you mean by half days? Like, I work somewhere between 10 to 14 hours a day. I'm lagging off a little bit more now because I'm older. But that was just what was normal and what was expected in the institution that I served. And then if you look around in other institutions, folks will go like, wow, we show up at 8 and we leave at 4. Okay, that's fine. If that's what works, what's going on there. And what I'm saying is, inside of that battle rhythm, I have a big sense of balance in terms of, okay, work hard, play hard, and then figure out what that looks like for yourself, right? And that's, whatever organization or squadron you go into will help drive that proverbial battle rhythm for you. Some folks will be on shift work, you know, and some folks will be working this half days like I talk about. Others will be working a more nominal schedule. But that's what was like normal for us, and so we just kind of accommodated it. But we also, I put a big fence around weekends because, okay, you're going to work 10 to 14 hours a day, five days a week. We're going to run hard. Then we're going to kind of deflate. And we're only going to use that shock absorber of the weekend when we absolutely, positively need to. Some organizations that you will go into will need to do that more often. Others won't. Because we don't want to burn you out either. Some personality traits are such that they can work at that 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. I'm not one of those. But you got to figure that out. You have to figure that out for yourself. And again, I'm against prescriptions. It's got to be what you want to kind of drive within your life.
So the weekend thing, unfortunately, doesn't work for me because I'm a 24/7 kind of person. And so sometimes I do have to work on the weekends. But the training that you're getting right now is your preparation. So I started as, you know, a student at Georgetown, and I ran track, and I ran cross country, and I did ROTC, and I was a pre-med, right? Where's there time to do anything else? It's time management. So it started back then, and it has just flowed right through to where we are now in time management. And after deployments, there's always a readjustment phase. I always give the example of, I've taken the garbage out for a year, and now you're home, and I'm taking the garbage out, and you think that's your job, that you want to take the garbage out. It doesn't mean that you argue about who takes the garbage out. Take it out together. But there's that readjustment phase of, I've been doing it this way for a year, and you haven't been here, and it's been good enough. Why are you criticizing me? Versus, wait a minute, you're not including me in doing what you've been doing for a year, and now I'm home. So again, it's communication.
Cuts both ways.
And use the training that you're getting right now in time management. because that's what it is. It's teaching you to manage your time, prioritize what is important, family, schoolwork, graduating, to get those things done.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Major General Fantini and Dr. Rizzo, thank you again for your time this afternoon. CNC Smith, thank you for moderating this session.
All right.